You cannot spill blood under the first oath. The sentence cut through the grand hall like a blade made of ice. A human voice. Soft, unsteady, and yet it carried across marble, through velvet shadows, into the bones of every creature present. The execution stopped. The blade hovered inches from the condemned vampire's throat. No one moved. Not the guards. Not the nobles. Not even the ancient ones who had ruled for centuries. At the center of it all stood a young waitress in a borrowed black uniform, her hands trembling, her breath shallow, as if she did not understand what she had just done. The air itself seemed to tighten around her. Candle flames bent toward her, as though listening. Somewhere in the silence, a chair scraped softly against stone. The vampire court had not been interrupted in over 300 years. And yet, here she was. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Emily Carter had not meant to speak. She had only been trying to carry a silver tray through a room that did not feel right from the moment she stepped inside. The building had looked like a private estate from the outside, tucked behind iron gates and tall hedges on the edge of the city. The kind of place where people with money held events that people like her were hired to serve, not to question. But the moment she crossed the threshold, something shifted. The temperature dropped. Not cold enough to see her breath, but enough to raise goosebumps along her arms. The guests did not laugh the way normal people did. Their smiles stopped too soon. Their eyes lingered too long. And no one touched the food. Not once. Emily had noticed that first. Tray after tray of untouched dishes returned to the kitchen, barely disturbed. Only the wine disappeared, dark and thick in crystal glasses that caught the light like something alive. She told herself it was just another strange high society event. She needed the money. Rent was due in 4 days. Her car had broken down last month, and her little brother was counting on her to keep things steady. So she kept her head down. Do the job. Get paid. Leave. That was the plan. Until the shouting started. It began as a low murmur across the hall. Then voices rose. Sharp. Controlled. Dangerous. Emily froze near one of the columns, clutching her tray as a group of guests formed a circle at the center of the room. She could not hear every word, but she understood enough. Accusation. Betrayal. Punishment. The man in the center of the circle was on his knees. Pale. Too pale. His hands bound behind his back with something that shimmered like silver under the chandelier light. No one tried to help him. No one stepped forward. And then someone gave the order. Calm. Quiet. Absolute. The kind of voice that did not need to be loud to be obeyed. A guard stepped forward. The blade appeared from nowhere, catching a flicker of candlelight as it lifted. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. This is not real, she told herself. This cannot be real. But no one was stopping it. No one was questioning it. The room had accepted what was about to happen as naturally as breathing. Something twisted inside her chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something older. Sharper. Wrong. And before she could stop herself, before she could think, before she even understood why the words were forming in her mind, Emily Carter opened her mouth and spoke a sentence that had not been heard in centuries. The sound did not come back all at once. It returned in fragments. A breath. A shifting foot. The faint crackle of candle wax sliding down brass holders. But no one spoke. No one dared. The guard holding the blade froze, as if his body no longer belonged to him. His arm trembled, not from weakness, but from something deeper, something that reached into the bones and held them still. The vampire on his knees lifted his head slowly, confusion flickering across his pale face, as though he had just been pulled back from the edge of something final. Around them, the nobles exchanged glances that were no longer arrogant or bored, but sharp with something close to fear. Emily felt it before she understood it. The shift. The room had changed, and somehow, impossibly, it had changed because of her. She staggered back half a step, her tray tilting in her hands before she caught it against her hip. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. I did not mean to say that, she thought, panic rising like a wave in her chest. I do not even know what that means. But the words still lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable, as if they carried weight beyond sound. At the center of the circle, the man who had given the execution order slowly turned his head toward her. He was tall, his posture effortless, his presence pressing against the room like an invisible force. His eyes were not red like the others. They burned with a deep, controlled gold, steady and ancient. Every instinct in Emily told her the same thing at once. This was the one in charge. This was the one no one disobeyed. Lucian Blackwood did not speak immediately. He studied her, not like a man looking at a stranger, but like something that had just discovered a detail that did not belong in the world it knew. His gaze moved from her face to her hands, to the tray she still clutched, then back to her eyes. The silence stretched until it felt like it might snap. Then, slowly, the guard lowered the blade. Not by choice. Not by hesitation. It was as if an invisible command had reached him before any word was spoken. The man on his knees exhaled sharply, his shoulders collapsing as the immediate threat faded, though he did not dare move further. No one gave him permission. Emily's breath caught. No one had said anything. No one had explained anything. But something had stopped the execution, and every eye in the room was now on her. A whisper broke from somewhere along the edge of the court. Then another. The words moved like a ripple through still water. First oath. Did you hear it? That language is dead. Impossible. The whispers grew, overlapping, urgent but hushed, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile thing had just taken hold. Emily's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray until her knuckles turned white. I need to leave, she thought. I need to walk out and pretend none of this happened. But her feet would not move, because Lucian Blackwood was walking toward her. Each step was slow, measured, the kind of movement that did not rush because it never needed to. The crowd parted before him without being told, creating a clear path that led directly to where. Emily stood. She felt smaller with every step he took. Not physically, something else, as if the air itself recognized him and bent around his presence. When he stopped in front of her, the distance between them was no more than a few feet. Close enough for her to see the faint reflection of candlelight in his eyes. Close enough to realize that those eyes were not just watching her. They were searching. His voice, when it came, was low, calm, controlled in a way that made it far more dangerous than shouting. Say it again. Emily blinked, her mind stalling. I do not know what you mean. Her voice came out softer than she intended, edged with the tremor she could no longer hide. The sentence. His gaze did not waver. Say it again. A cold weight settled in her chest. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The words that had risen so easily before were gone, as if they had never belonged to her at all. I cannot, she whispered. The moment the words left her lips, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not disappointment, something far more unsettling. Recognition. Behind him, the court had gone completely silent again, waiting, watching. And for the first time since she stepped into that room, Emily Carter realized she was no longer just a waitress trying to survive a shift. She was the center of something ancient, something that had just woken up. Lucian Blackwood did not move, but the entire room seemed to tighten around the silence that followed her answer. I cannot. The words lingered between them, fragile and dangerous. For a fraction of a second, something unreadable crossed his face. Then it vanished behind that same cold control that had ruled this court for centuries. He stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough that Emily could feel the difference in the air, as if the temperature dropped another degree simply because he willed it. You spoke a law that predates every soul in this room, he said quietly. His voice did not rise, yet it carried to every corner of the hall. The first oath is not a phrase learned by accident. It is not written. It is not taught. It is remembered. A murmur moved through the court again, softer now, more cautious, as if even the act of reacting had become dangerous. Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. I do not remember anything like that, she said. I have never heard those words before tonight. That was the truth. At least, it felt like the truth. But even as she said it, something flickered at the edge of her thoughts. Not a memory. Not clearly. More like a feeling, a rhythm, a cadence that felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Lucien's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. He was listening to something beyond her voice, beyond her words. The way her breath hitched, the way her pulse stuttered, the way the silence wrapped around her differently than it did anyone else in the room. Impossible, someone whispered from the far side of the hall. A woman stepped forward, her gown dark as midnight, her expression sharp with controlled disdain. No human carries the first oath. It died with the old bloodlines. Lucien did not look at her. Not yet. His attention remained fixed on Emily. And yet, here it stands before us, he replied, his tone unchanged. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. Then it is a deception, a trick, a planted human sent to disrupt the court. Guards shifted at the edges of the room, tension coiling through their bodies as if waiting for permission to act. Emily's stomach dropped. This is bad. This is very bad. I'm not part of anything, she said quickly, her voice shaking now. I was hired for tonight. That is all. I do not even know what this place is. That last sentence slipped out before she could stop it. A few of the vampires nearest to her reacted instantly. Not with anger, with something colder. Amusement mixed with disbelief. You do not know? The woman in black repeated softly, as if tasting the words. Lucien finally turned his head slightly, acknowledging her presence without fully facing her. Lady Seraphine, he said, and the name alone seemed to quiet the room further. Do you suggest that she stands here, alone, surrounded by us, and lies without understanding the cost? Seraphine's eyes flicked to Emily, then back to Lucien. I suggest that no human speaks that sentence unless something far more dangerous stands behind her. The implication hung in the air like a shadow. Emily felt it settle over her, heavy and suffocating. Behind her, as if she were not enough to explain what had just happened, as if something else had to be responsible. Lucien turned back to her fully now. Tell me your name. Emily hesitated for half a second, then answered. Emily Carter. The moment the name left her lips, a strange stillness followed. Not from the court. From him. Lucien repeated it under his breath, slower, as if testing how it fit into something unseen. Emily Carter. He took one more step closer. Close enough now that she could see the faint lines etched into his expression, not from age, but from something older. Time. Experience. Burden. You said you do not remember learning that sentence, he continued. Then we will approach this differently. His gaze sharpened. Tell me this. Have you ever spoken words you did not understand before tonight? The question hit something deep inside her. Emily froze. Her mind searched, reaching backward through years of small, forgotten moments. And then it came. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to make her breath catch. There had been times, as a child, late at night, half asleep, words she had whispered without knowing why. Sounds that felt too structured to be random, too familiar to be new. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. I thought I was dreaming, she said slowly. Lucien did not react outwardly, but something in the room shifted again. Not power, not yet. Something closer to anticipation. Because whatever Emily Carter had just admitted was not an answer. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous than anyone in that room had expected. Emily Carter had never felt so visible in her life. Not at work, not at school, not even in the small apartment she shared with her younger brother where every dollar mattered and every decision carried weight. But here, in a room filled with creatures who moved like shadows and watched like predators, every inch of her felt exposed. Lucien Blackwood's gaze did not leave her, and that alone seemed to hold the entire court in place. No one spoke over him. No one interrupted. It was as if the world itself waited for what he would say next. You thought you were dreaming, he repeated, his voice lower now, almost reflective. Emily nodded, though uncertainty flickered behind the motion. They were not clear memories, just fragments. Nights where she woke, with her heart racing and the echo of words on her lips. Words she never understood. Words she never repeated. Until now, a faint shift in the air drew her attention. The vampire who had been on his knees was still there, unmoving, as if afraid that any sudden motion would undo whatever invisible protection had been placed over him. The blade that had hovered at his throat now hung uselessly at the guard's side, but the tension had not left the room. It had only changed direction. It was no longer aimed at the condemned. It was aimed at her. Seraphine stepped forward again, her presence sharp and deliberate. "Then we test her," she said. Her voice was smooth, but there was steel beneath it. "If the first oath truly answers to her, then it will respond again. If not, we end this farce now." A ripple of agreement moved through parts of the court, quieter than before, but no less dangerous. Emily's chest tightened. "Test me how?" she asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Seraphine's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Bring the child." The words landed heavier than anything that had been said so far. For a moment, Emily did not understand. Then she saw the reaction in the room. Several of the vampires stiffened, not in excitement, in caution, in something closer to reluctance. From a far end of the hall, a guard moved without speaking. He disappeared through a side door, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. Emily's stomach twisted. A child. The word echoed in her mind, sharp and out of place in a room like this. She took a small step back before she could stop herself. "What child?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Lucien did not answer immediately. His gaze flicked briefly towards Seraphine, then back to Emily. There was a shift there, subtle, but real, a line being drawn. "This is not necessary," he said, his tone still calm, but firmer now. Seraphine met his gaze without flinching. "If she carries what you think she carries, then necessity left this room the moment she spoke." The guard returned before anyone could respond further. And he was not alone. He led a small figure into the hall, no more than 8 or 9 years old, dressed in dark formal clothing that seemed too heavy for his slight frame. The boy's steps were careful, uncertain, as if he understood exactly where he was and what it meant to be there. His skin was pale like the others, but there was something softer about him, something not yet hardened by whatever this world demanded. Emily felt her breath catch. This is wrong. Every instinct she had screamed it at once. The boy looked around the hall, his eyes wide, searching, until they landed on Lucien. Something in his expression shifted then. Recognition. Trust. He took a hesitant step forward, stopping a few feet away from the king. "My lord," he said quietly. His voice was small, but clear. Seraphine's attention moved between them, calculating. "The child is of the royal line," she said, "bound to the oldest laws. If the first oath recognizes her, it will protect him. If not, then we will have our answer." Emily's hand shook. "Protect him from what?" she asked, though the answer was already forming in her mind. Seraphine did not look at her when she replied. "From judgment." The words settled into the room like a weight. Lucien's jaw tightened, the only visible sign that something in this situation had crossed a line even he did not approve of. But he did not stop it. Not yet, because something else was at play now. Something older than preference, older than authority. The boy turned his head slightly, looking at Emily with quiet curiosity, as if he did not understand why she was the center of everything. And in that moment, Emily felt it again. That same pull in her chest. That same strange, familiar rhythm rising beneath her fear. Not panic, not confusion. Something else. Something that did not belong to her. The room held its breath, waiting, watching. And for the second time that night, Emily Carter stood at the edge of a moment that could not be undone. The silence deepened as the boy stood between them, small and fragile in a room filled with ancient power. Emily could hear her own heartbeat again, loud and uneven, as if her body was trying to warn her to run, to leave, to disappear before something irreversible happened. But her feet remained rooted to the marble floor. The child's eyes met hers, not with fear, but with quiet curiosity, as if he sensed something different about her. But he could not name. That made it worse. That made everything feel heavier. "Do not be afraid," she wanted to say, but the words caught in her throat. Because she was afraid. Terrified in a way she had never felt before. Not for herself. For him. Seraphine lifted her hand slightly, a subtle motion that carried authority through the room. The guards responded immediately, forming a loose circle around the boy and Emily, not touching them, but closing off every exit. The message was clear. There would be no leaving. There would be no interruption. This would happen here. Lucien's gaze darkened, but he did not step forward. Not yet. He was watching, measuring, waiting for something only he seemed to understand. The boy shifted his weight, glancing once more toward Lucien as if seeking permission, then back to Emily. "What do I need to do?" he asked softly. The question landed like a stone in Emily's chest. "Nothing," she said quickly, her voice sharper than she intended. "You should not be here." Seraphine's expression did not change, but something colder slipped into her tone. "The child will stand where he is. If the first oath answers to you, it will bind to his safety. If it does not, then the court will proceed as it always has." Emily shook her head, panic rising. "I do not know how to do anything," she said. "I told you, I did not understand those words." "Then perhaps," Seraphine replied, "you will understand what happens when they fail." The implication was clear. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Emily's hands trembled at her sides, her mind racing, searching for something, anything that could stop this. But there was nothing. No instructions, no memory, just that same strange feeling building again beneath her ribs, like a second heartbeat that did not belong to her. The boy took one small step closer to her, close enough now that she could see the faint color in his eyes, a soft shade of gray that looked almost human. "Are you going to say something again?" he asked. His voice held no accusation, only trust. That trust hit harder than fear ever could. Emily swallowed, her throat tight. "I do not know if I can," she admitted. That was the truth. The last time had not been a choice. It had happened to her, not because of her. Lucien's voice cut through the tension, low but absolute. "Enough." The single word sent a ripple through the court, but Seraphine did not back down. "If you stop this now," she said, her eyes fixed on him, "then you accept uncertainty into the law. You accept that something unknown can command what even you must obey." A pause. Then, softer, more dangerous. "Or are you afraid of what she might be?" The words landed with precision. For the first time, something sharp flickered in Lucien's expression. Not fear. Not exactly. Something closer to recognition of a truth he had not yet spoken aloud. His gaze returned to Emily. The room held its breath again. The second heartbeat inside her grew stronger, louder, until it felt like it was echoing through her entire body. She could feel it in her fingertips, in her throat, in the space behind her eyes. The same rhythm, the same pull. The boy's small hand brushed lightly against her sleeve, not grabbing, not clinging, just enough to anchor himself. That was all it took. The world shifted. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else could see. But inside her, something aligned. The fear did not disappear. It changed. It sharpened. Became something else. Emily closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, her breath catching as that unfamiliar cadence rose again, forming in her mind with a clarity that terrified her. When she opened her eyes, they were steady, not calm, not confident, but certain in a way she could not explain. The court leaned in without moving, drawn by something they could not resist. And somewhere deep in the silence, the ancient words began to return. The first word did not come from her mouth. It moved through her like a current, rising from somewhere deeper than thought, deeper than memory. Emily felt it before she heard it, a vibration in her chest that spread outward, steady and undeniable. The boy beside her stilled, his small hand still resting against her sleeve, as if he could feel it too. The court leaned closer without taking a step, drawn into the invisible pull of something ancient waking beneath the surface of the moment. Emily's lips parted slowly. Her breath trembled once, then steadied as the cadence returned, clearer now, sharper, each syllable forming with a precision that did not belong to her. "You cannot harm what stands under the first oath," she said, her voice no longer uncertain, but layered with something older, something that echoed through the chamber as if the walls themselves remembered it. The effect was immediate. The air shifted, not violently, but with a quiet force that pressed outward from her and the boy at her side. The candles flickered, their flames bending low as if in acknowledgement. The guards around them froze again, their bodies locking in place, not by command, but by something deeper than obedience. Even Seraphine's posture changed, her shoulders tightening ever so slightly as her gaze sharpened, calculating, reassessing. The boy's breathing steadied. The tension in his small frame eased, as if an unseen weight had lifted from him. He did not fully understand what had happened, but he felt the difference. "Safe," he whispered, almost to himself. Emily heard it, and something inside her responded, not with fear this time, but with a strange, quiet certainty. Across from them, Lucien Blackwood stood completely still, not frozen, not restrained, still by choice. His eyes, those steady gold depths, were fixed on her with an intensity that had shifted from curiosity to something far more dangerous. Recognition, not of her face, not of her name, of what had just moved through her. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with meaning that stretched far beyond the room. The condemned vampire on his knees let out a shaky breath, his head lowering as if in reverence rather than fear. The blade that had threatened him now rested fully at the guard's side, forgotten, irrelevant. Seraphine took a slow step forward, her voice cutting carefully through the charged stillness. "That was not mimicry," she said. Her tone was controlled, but there was no denying the shift beneath it. That was invocation. A word passed through the court like a shadow. Invocation. It carried weight. History. Consequence. Emily did not understand the word, but she felt its impact ripple outward, changing the way every eye in the room looked at her. No longer dismissive, no longer curious. Now, they were watching her the way one watches something unpredictable, something powerful, something that should not exist. Lucien finally moved, one step forward, then another, slow, measured, until he stood directly before her, closer than before, close enough that she could feel the faint chill that surrounded him like a second skin. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than ever, but it carried more force than anything that had come before. "That sentence binds law older than this court," he said. "Older than my reign. Older than the factions that sit within these walls." His gaze did not waver, and it answered to you, not question, a statement. Emily's certainty faltered for a moment under the weight of it. "I did not choose it," she said, her voice softer now, the echo of that other presence fading. "It just happened." Lucien studied her for a long second, as if measuring the truth of that in ways no human could understand. Around them, the court remained perfectly still, caught between obedience and uncertainty, waiting for direction that had not yet come. Seraphine's eyes flicked between them, her mind clearly moving faster now, recalculating every assumption she had made. "Then we have confirmation," she said. "And confirmation demands resolution." Lucien did not look at her. Not yet. His focus remained on Emily. "Resolution," he repeated softly, as if testing the word. The boy beside Emily shifted slightly, glancing up at Lucien, then back at her, as if sensing that whatever came next would matter more than anything that had happened so far. Emily felt it too. The moment had not ended. It had only deepened. Whatever she had done had not closed anything. It had opened something. And now, every ancient rule in that room was beginning to move around her. Slowly, inevitably, like pieces on a board she did not know she had stepped onto. The word resolution did not settle the room. It sharpened it, like a blade being drawn across stone, slow and deliberate, sending a quiet warning through every corner of the court. Emily felt it in the way the air pressed closer around her, in a way the silence no longer felt like pause, but like preparation. Lucien Blackwood finally turned his head towards Seraphine, his expression unreadable, but the shift in his attention alone was enough to send a ripple through the gathered nobles. "You speak of resolution as if this is a matter already understood," he said, his voice calm, but edged now with something firmer. Seraphine held his gaze without hesitation. When an unknown force speaks, a binding law older than. This court, it is not a curiosity, my lord. It is a threat or a claim. There is no third option. The words settled heavily. A threat or a claim. Emily's chest tightened. I am neither, she said, her voice quieter now but steady. I did not ask for any of this. No one responded to her directly, but she felt the shift again, the way some of the eyes in the room flicked toward her not with hostility, but with calculation, as if they were beginning to consider what she might represent rather than what she was. Seraphine took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to make her presence impossible to ignore. Then we determine which it is, she said. The law she invoked does not answer without consequence. If she carries that authority, then she must be bound to it. If she does not, then the court must remove the anomaly before it spreads. The word anomaly landed like a quiet verdict. Emily's fingers curled slightly at her sides, not in defiance, but in grounding. She needed something solid, something real, because everything else felt like it was shifting too fast. The boy beside her did not move away. If anything, he stood a little straighter, as if whatever had protected him had also given him a reason to stay. Lucien's gaze flicked briefly to the child, then back to Seraphine. And what would you suggest? He asked. His tone was neutral, but there was a weight beneath it now, something that warned this was not a question asked lightly. Seraphine's answer came without hesitation. We invoke the second oath. The reaction was immediate. Not loud, not chaotic, but sharp. Several of the older vampires stiffened, their composure cracking just enough to reveal something deeper. Concern. Even the guards shifted slightly, their formation tightening instinctively. Emily did not understand the words, but she understood the effect. This was worse. Whatever the second oath was, it carried consequences that even they did not take lightly. Lucien's expression hardened, just enough to be noticeable. That oath has not been called in over a century, he said. And for good reason. Seraphine inclined her head slightly. And yet, here we stand with a human who commands the first. Tradition exists to guide us when the unknown appears. Emily shook her head, stepping back half a step before she could stop herself. I do not even know what that means, she said. You're talking about binding things I do not understand. Her voice did not break, but the strain was there, clear and human in a room that had very little of either left. Seraphine's gaze moved to her then, sharp and assessing. Understanding is not required for the law to recognize you. That was the most terrifying part. Lucien exhaled slowly, a controlled release that seemed to steady the room rather than disturb it. Enough speculation, he said. The words cut through the rising tension, pulling attention back to him. He stepped forward again, placing himself slightly between Emily and the rest of the court, not shielding her, but altering the line of engagement. The movement did not go unnoticed. Seraphine's eyes narrowed slightly, but she did not comment. Lucien's gaze returned to Emily. You did not come here seeking power, he said. It was not a question. No, she answered immediately. I came here to work a shift and go home. Something almost imperceptible shifted in his expression again. Not softening, not approval, recognition of truth. Behind him, the court waited, suspended between two forces that had not yet collided. Seraphine's voice broke the silence once more, quieter now, but no less sharp. Intent does not erase consequence, my lord. The law has been spoken. It must be answered. The tension reached its peak, stretching thin, ready to break in any direction. Emily felt it in her bones. Whatever happened next would not be undone. And for the first time since she spoke those impossible words, she realized something else. This was no longer about whether she understood the power that had moved through her. It was about whether she would survive what came after it. The word survive did not leave her mind. It stayed there, heavy and sharp, as the room shifted once again around forces she could not control. Emily felt the boy's presence at her side, small but steady, like an anchor in a place that offered none. The court had stopped pretending this was a test. Now it was a decision, and decisions in a room like this did not favor the powerless. Seraphine stepped forward one final pace, her voice no longer raised, but carrying a quiet finality that felt more dangerous than any command. Then we proceed, she said, if The second oath is required. It will be invoked. The law will determine whether she stands as claimant or threat. The words echoed through the hall, and this time the reaction was not contained. It spread. Low murmurs broke through the silence, tension unraveling into something sharper. Not chaos. Anticipation. Emily's chest tightened as she looked from one face to another. None of them looked uncertain anymore. They looked ready. Ready for something she did not understand. Ready for something she might not survive. The boy shifted closer to her, his shoulder brushing her arm. "They are wrong about you," he said quietly. The simplicity of it made her breath catch. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then looked toward Lucien before answering. "Because he has not stopped watching you." Emily followed his gaze. Lucien stood exactly where he had placed himself, between her and the rest of the court, his presence steady and immovable. But the boy was right. He had not looked away. Not once. As if something about her mattered more than the rising pressure in the room. Seraphine noticed it too. Of course she did. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her tone shifting just enough to reveal the edge beneath her control. "My lord," she said, "you hesitate. That alone invites doubt. Doubt invites fracture, and fracture invites war." The last word landed hard. Even Emily understood that. War was not a metaphor here. It was a reality they had lived through and would again if pushed. Lucien did not respond immediately. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. Not uncertain. Measured. Calculated. He was choosing. Emily could feel it. Every instinct she had told her that whatever he decided next would shape everything that followed. She swallowed, forcing herself to speak even as fear tightened her chest. "I am not your enemy," she said. "I do not even know what I am to you. But I did not come here to hurt anyone." Her voice did not carry the authority of ancient words this time. It carried something else. Something human, honest, fragile. And yet, in that room, it stood out more than any power she had shown. For a brief moment, something shifted in Lucien's expression. Not fully visible, but there. Recognition again. Not of power this time. Of intent. Seraphine's gaze sharpened. "Intent is irrelevant when law has been invoked," she said. The moment the first oath answered, the balance changed. "You know this." Lucien's eyes flicked toward her, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable in his tone when he replied. "I know more than you assume." The air tightened again, but now it centered on them, not on Emily. A different kind of tension. Older, deeper, the kind that came from history, from power that had not always agreed. Seraphine did not step back. "Then act," she said, "because if you do not, the court will interpret your silence as weakness. And weakness will not hold what has just been unleashed." The word unleashed hung in the air, directed at Emily without being spoken to her. She felt it, felt the weight of being something they did not understand, something they feared enough to control. Her hands trembled slightly, but she did not step back again. Not this time. The boy beside her remained where he was, his quiet trust unchanged. Lucien finally moved. Not toward Seraphine, not toward the court, toward Emily. One step, then another, each one deliberate, each one shifting the balance of the room in a way no one could ignore. When he stopped in front of her, the space between them felt different than before. Not just tension, something else. Decision. His voice was low when he spoke, but it carried with absolute clarity. "No one will invoke the second oath tonight." The words hit the room like a shockwave. Not loud, not explosive, but undeniable. Final. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then the reaction came. Not chaos. Resistance. Seraphine's composure held, but the edge in her voice sharpened. "You would override the law for a human you do not understand." Lucien's gaze did not waver. "I would prevent the court from making a mistake it cannot undo." The words settled, heavy and absolute. And for the first time since she entered that room, Emily realized something had shifted in her favor. Not completely, not safely, but enough to matter. Because the most powerful being in that room had just chosen not to let her be destroyed. And that choice would not come without consequences. The word consequences did not need to be repeated. It moved through the court like a living thing, settling into every shadow, every glance, every silent calculation being made in that room. Emily felt it in the way the tension did not break after Lucien's declaration, but instead shifted into something sharper, more dangerous. This was no longer a question of what she had done. It was about what his decision meant. Seraphine did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When she spoke, every word carried the weight of centuries of power that did not bend easily. "Then you have chosen a side, my lord," she said. Not against her. Against the court. The statement landed harder than any accusation. Around them, several of the nobles straightened, their attention sharpening as the implication spread. This was no longer about a human anomaly. It was about division at the highest level. Emily's chest tightened. This is escalating. Too fast. Too far. She glanced at Lucien, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that suggested he might step back. But there was none. His expression remained composed, controlled, but there was something new beneath it. Not defiance. Conviction. "I have chosen to prevent irreversible error," he replied. "The court does not exist to destroy what it does not understand." Seraphine's eyes darkened slightly. The court exists to maintain order, and order does not survive uncertainty. The two forces in the room had finally collided, not with movement, with belief. Emily felt it like pressure building between them, invisible but undeniable. The boy beside her shifted again, his small hand still near her sleeve, as if he refused to move even now. His presence grounded her more than anything else in that room. If he is not afraid, she thought, then I cannot collapse. But fear was not the only thing rising inside her anymore. There was something else now. That same strange awareness. That same quiet pull beneath her ribs, steady and waiting. Lucien's gaze moved briefly to the child, then back to Seraphine. "If order demands the destruction of something that may be foundational to the law itself, then your definition of order is flawed," he said. A ripple moved through the court at that. Not agreement. Not fully. But doubt. And doubt, in a place built on certainty, was dangerous. Seraphine saw it immediately. Of course she did, which is why her next words were sharper, more precise. "Then answer this," she said. "If she is what you suggest, if she hold a law older than your reign, then what is she to you?" The question cut through everything else. It was not rhetorical. It was a demand. Define her. The room seemed to still completely. Even the faint sounds that had lingered at the edges faded away. Emily's breath caught, because she wanted to know the answer too. Not in terms of power, in terms of survival. What am I to him? What am I to any of them? Lucien did not respond immediately. For the first time since she had spoken the first oath, there was a pause in him that was not calculated. It was measured in something else. Recognition, not just of what she had done, of what she might represent. His eyes returned to her, steady and searching. Not as a ruler assessing a threat. Not as a predator studying prey. As someone trying to understand a piece of a history he did not expect to see again. Emily held his gaze, even as uncertainty tightened in her chest. She did not look away. She cannot, because whatever answer came next would define everything. Seraphine did not let the silence stretch too long. "If you cannot define her," she said quietly, "then you cannot protect her. And if you cannot protect her, then the court will act." The ultimatum was clear. Absolute. Lucien exhaled slowly, the movement controlled but waited. Then he spoke. "She is under my protection." The words landed like a seal. Not loud, not dramatic. Final. A different kind of silence followed. Not uncertainty this time. Impact. Because that statement carried consequences far beyond this room. Seraphine's expression did not change, but something colder settled in her eyes. "Then you bind yourself to her fate," she said. "Whatever she is, whatever she becomes, the court will hold you accountable for it." Lucien did not hesitate. "I am aware." Emily felt the weight of that exchange settle over her, heavier than anything before. This was no longer about a moment, or a mistake, or a sentence spoken without understanding. This had become a bond, one she did not ask for, one he had chosen anyway. The boy beside her looked up at Lucien, something like relief softening his expression. But around them, the court had not relaxed. If anything, It had grown more dangerous. Because now the lines were drawn. Not clearly, not openly, but enough that everyone in that room understood one thing. Whatever Emily Carter was, she was no longer just a human who spoke a forbidden sentence. She was now at the center of a fracture that could split the entire vampire court apart. The word fracture did not fade. It settled into the room like a crack spreading through glass, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore once it began to widen. Emily felt it in the way the court no longer moved as a single force. Subtle shifts, divided attention, quiet glances exchanged between those who had stood united only moments before. This was no longer about her alone. It was about what she had awakened. Lucien Blackwood did not step back after claiming her protection. If anything, he stood more firmly in place, as though the decision had anchored him rather than burdened him. But the weight of it was undeniable. Every ancient eye in that room now measured him as much as they measured her. Seraphine's voice cut through the silence, once more, quieter now, but carrying a precision that made it more dangerous than before. Then we proceed to truth, she said. If she is under your protection, then you will want clarity as much as we do. No more speculation. No more uncertainty. The word truth did not sound like relief. It sounded like exposure. Emily's stomach tightened as she felt the shift again. This was the next step. Not destruction. Not yet. Something else. Something that might be worse. Lucien's gaze remained steady, but there was a flicker of something deeper behind it now. Calculation. What do you propose? He asked. Seraphine did not hesitate. We uncover what binds her to the first oath. The origin. The bloodline. The law does not attach itself without cause. The court murmured again, quieter, more controlled, but the tension did not lessen. It sharpened, because this was not a simple inquiry. This was excavation, and whatever they uncovered would not stay buried. Emily's breath caught slightly. Bloodline. The word felt distant and personal at the same time. I do not have anything like that, she said. I am just a normal person. The moment the words left her mouth, she felt how hollow they sounded in that room. Normal did not exist here. Not anymore. Seraphine's eyes settled on her with a calm that felt far colder than open hostility. You were, she said, before tonight. The distinction was subtle, but absolute. Emily's chest tightened. Before tonight. As if whatever she had been no longer applied. As if that part of her life had already ended the moment she spoke those words. Lucien stepped slightly closer again, not touching her, but closing the space just enough to draw focus back to him. There are ways to trace what you carry, he said, his voice low, controlled. Not through force. Through resonance. Emily frowned slightly, confusion cutting through her fear. I do not understand what that means. His gaze softened, just slightly, though the intensity remained. It means we do not need you to explain what you cannot remember. The law you invoked will answer for you. A quiet tension spread again through the court. Not resistance. Anticipation. Because whatever this method was, it would reveal something they had all begun to suspect. Something older than Emily Carter. Seraphine inclined her head slightly. Then begin, she said. If she truly carries that law, it will not remain silent when called. The boy beside Emily looked up at her again, his expression uncertain now. Will it hurt? He asked quietly. The question struck deeper than anything else that had been said. Emily forced a small, steady breath. I do not know, she answered honestly, but I will be okay. She was not sure if that was true, but she said it anyway, because he needed to hear it. Lucien's gaze flicked briefly to the child, then back to Emily. His expression hardened slightly, not toward her, but toward the situation itself. He was making another decision. Then we do this carefully, he said. No one interferes. No one interrupts. If the law answers, we listen. The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Even Seraphine did not challenge it. Not directly. The court shifted, forming a wider circle now, giving space without retreating. The air grew still again, but this time it carried expectation rather than restraint. Emily felt the change immediately. That same presence beneath her ribs stirred again, stronger now, more aware, as if it recognized what was about to happen. Lucien raised his hand slightly, not in command but in focus. The movement was subtle, but the effect was immediate. The room quieted completely. Every sound faded, every motion stilled, until there was nothing left but breath, and a faint, steady rhythm building inside her. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, her pulse racing, her thoughts scattering as something deeper began to rise again. Not fear, not exactly. Something older, something that did not belong to her, but had chosen her anyway. The court waited, watching, listening, and somewhere in that silence, something ancient began to answer. The answer did not come as a voice. It came as a shift, subtle at first, then undeniable. Emily felt it before anyone else could see it, the rhythm inside her changing, aligning with something older than her own heartbeat. It was no longer just a sensation. It was presence, a quiet force unfolding beneath her skin, rising through her chest, into her throat, into the space behind her eyes. Her breath caught as the world around her seemed to dim, not in darkness, but in focus, as if everything unnecessary had fallen away, leaving only what mattered. The court, the king, the law, and her. A faint glow flickered beneath the surface of her skin, barely visible, like light moving underwater. It traced along her wrist first, slow and deliberate, forming lines that curved and twisted into shapes too precise to be random. The nearest vampires noticed immediately. Their posture shifted, their stillness tightening into something closer to reverence. Not commanded, instinctive. Lucien did not move, but his gaze sharpened, locked onto the pattern as it formed. Recognition did not come all at once. It built, piece by piece, until it settled into something that changed the weight of his silence entirely. Emily gasped softly as the sensation intensified. It did not hurt, not exactly, but it was overwhelming, like holding something too large for her to contain. Images flickered at the edge of her mind. Not memories, not fully. Fragments. A hall not unlike this one, but older, colder. A voice speaking the same words she had spoken, but stronger, clearer, as if the law itself had been born in that moment. A figure standing where she stood now. Not a waitress. Not ordinary. Something else. The glow along her wrist deepened, the pattern completing itself in a symbol that seemed to pulse in time with that second heartbeat. The boy beside her stared at it, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with quiet awe. "It is the mark," he whispered. The words were soft, but they carried. A murmur spread through the court, no longer controlled, no longer quiet, not chaos. Recognition. Seraphine's composure held, but her gaze sharpened in a way that revealed more than her voice ever would. The mark was not supposed to exist. Not here. Not now. Not in a human. Lucien stepped forward without realizing it, the movement subtle, but enough to shift the balance of the space again. His voice, when it came, was lower than before, but edged with something new, something that had not been there until this moment. That mark belonged to the first bloodline bound to the oath, he said. His eyes did not leave hers. It was thought to be lost. The weight of those words settled heavily. Lost, as in gone, as in erased from history. Emily shook her head slightly, her breath uneven as the glow began to fade, leaving the mark behind, faint but unmistakable against her skin. "I do not know what that means," she said. "I'm just Emily." The statement felt smaller now, not untrue, but incomplete. Lucien's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity did not lessen. "No," he said quietly. "You're not just anything." The court felt it too. The shift. The realization that what stood before them was not an accident, not a coincidence. Something had returned, something they had believed would never exist again. Seraphine spoke again, but her voice had changed. Less certain, more precise. "Then she is not an anomaly," she said. "She's a resurgence." The word carried a different kind of weight. Not threat alone, not claim alone. Something more complicated, something that could not be easily controlled or dismissed. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she looked down at her wrist, at the faint pattern that remained. It felt real, too real. as if it had always been there, waiting to be seen. The boy's small voice broke through the tension again. "Does that mean she is important?" he asked. No one answered immediately, because the answer was no longer simple. Lucien finally spoke, his voice steady, but quieter than before. "It means she changes everything." The room absorbed that statement in silence. Not resistance, not acceptance, something in between. Because change, in a place built on centuries of unbroken law, was never small. Emily felt it settle over her. Heavier than fear, heavier than confusion. This was no longer about surviving the night. This was about what came after. And for the first time, she understood one thing clearly. Whatever had awakened inside her was not going away. The word change did not echo. It settled. Heavy. Final. And for a moment, no one in the court moved, as if even breathing too loudly might disrupt something far larger than any of them could control. Emily stood in the center of it all, her gaze still lowered to the faint mark on her wrist, her fingers trembling just slightly as she tried to make sense of something that refused to fit into the life she had known only hours before. Rent, bills, double shifts, a broken car. That world felt distant now. Small, not gone, but no longer enough to explain what she had become. The boy beside her shifted again, his presence gentle but steady, as if he refused to let her stand alone in a room that had already decided she was no longer one of them. "You are still you," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they reached her in a way nothing else had. Emily looked at him, really looked this time, and for the first time since everything began, her breath steadied. "Thank you," she said softly. Across from them, Lucien watched the exchange in silence. Something in his expression had changed again. Not softened, not entirely, but there was a shift in the way he looked at her now. Less like a problem to solve, more like a truth he needed to understand. Seraphine broke the moment, her voice cutting clean through the quiet. "Then the matter is no longer whether she carries the law," she said. "It is what that law demands now that it has returned." The question settled into the room with a different kind of weight. Not accusation, expectation, because something ancient had awakened, and ancient things did not return without purpose. Emily felt the words press against her, even though she did not understand them fully. "What is a demand?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Seraphine's gaze moved to her, sharp and deliberate. "That is not for you to decide. The law speaks through you. It does not answer to you." The distinction was clear and terrifying. Emily's chest tightened again, but this time, she did not step back, because something inside her had already begun to understand that retreat was no longer an option. Lucien stepped forward once more, placing himself slightly closer to her side, not shielding her, but aligning with her in a way the court could not ignore. "Then we do not force it," he said. "The law has revealed itself. That is enough for tonight." Seraphine's eyes narrowed slightly. "You would delay what must be understood." Lucien did not look at her when he answered. "I would prevent reckless interpretation of something we have not seen in centuries." His gaze returned to Emily, steady, unwavering. "She is not a tool to be used for answers." The words landed differently this time. Not as authority, as boundary. Emily felt it. That line being drawn. Not just between her and the court, between what she was and how she would be treated. Seraphine held his gaze for a long moment, then inclined her head slightly. A concession. Small, temporary, but real. "Then the court will reconvene," she said. "And when it does, we will expect clarity. Not speculation. Not hesitation." The implication remained. This was not over. Not even close. The court began to shift then, not dispersing, but adjusting, as if the tension had changed form rather than disappeared. Conversations would happen after this. Quiet. Strategic. The fracture that had formed earlier had not healed. It had only been delayed. The boy looked up at Lucien, then back to Emily. "Does that mean she can leave?" he asked. The question cut through everything else with a kind of innocence that did not belong in that room. Lucien's gaze softened slightly as he looked at the child, then returned to Emily. "No," he said. "Not yet." Emily's breath caught slightly, but she did not protest, because she understood now. Leaving was not simple anymore. Not after what had happened. Not after what she carried. Lucien turned his attention fully to her, his voice lowering so that it reached her clearly, even as the room around them began to shift. "You will not return to your old life tonight," he said. The statement was not cruel, not forceful, just true. Emily swallowed, the weight of it settling into her chest. "I did not expect to," she admitted quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the court remained distant, muted by the space that seemed to form around them. Then Lucien spoke again, softer this time. "You're not alone in this." The words were simple, but they carried something she had not felt since this began. Not safety, not yet, but something close enough to matter. Emily looked down at her wrist once more, at the faint mark that had changed everything. Then she looked back up at him. "I hope you are right," she said, "because whatever this is, I do not think it is finished with me." Lucien's gaze did not waver. "No," he said quietly. "It has only just begun." The court did not disperse all at once. It unraveled slowly, like tension being pulled apart thread by thread. Each noble retreating into quiet conversations, each glance carrying calculation instead of certainty. But the center of the room remained unchanged. Emily Carter, Lucien Blackwood, and the faint mark that had rewritten everything. Hours seemed to pass, though no clock marked them. The chandeliers still burned with steady light, untouched by time, as if this place existed outside the world she had known. Emily stood near the edge of the hall now, no longer surrounded, but not free. The boy had been gently led away, his small hand slipping from her sleeve with a reluctant glance back, as if he did not want to leave her there alone. But she was not alone. Not really. Lucien remained. He had not left her side since the court shifted. Not close enough to crowd her, but never far enough to disappear. Watching, thinking, and finally, when the last of the nobles stepped away into the deeper corridors of the estate, he spoke. "The court will return in 2 nights, he said. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. "They will come prepared. Not to test, to decide." Emily exhaled slowly, absorbing the meaning behind those words. This was not over. It would not fade with time. It would sharpen, become something unavoidable. "What happens until then?" she asked. Lucien turned slightly, his gaze settling on her fully again. "You come with me," he said. The simplicity of it left no room for argument. Not as an order, as reality. Emily hesitated for only a moment, not because she wanted to refuse, but because she understood what it meant. Leaving this place with, it would not just be survival. It would be alignment, a choice, even if it did not feel like one. And yet, she nodded, because staying behind was not an option. Because returning to her old life was no longer possible. And because, for reasons she could not fully explain, she trusted him more than she feared the others. Lucien turned without another word, and she followed. The halls beyond the court were quieter, colder, the stone walls stretching endlessly in dim golden light. Their footsteps echoed softly, the only sound in a place that felt carved out of time itself. As they walked, Emily glanced down at her wrist again. The mark remained, faint but real, a constant reminder that whatever had awakened inside her was not temporary. It was part of her now. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she asked quietly. Lucien did not stop walking, but his answer came without hesitation. "You learn," he said, "not for books, not from others, from it." The answer was not comforting, but it was honest. They reached a set of tall doors at the end of the corridor, guarded but silent. Lucien pushed them open, revealing a private chamber beyond, dimly lit, vast but still. A place removed from a court. A place where decisions could be made without witnesses. "You will stay here," he said. "No one enters without my command." Emily stepped inside slowly, taking in the space, the quiet, the weight of what it meant to be placed under his direct protection. She turned back to him, uncertainty flickering once more. "And you?" she asked. Lucien met her gaze, steady as always. "I will prepare the court for what they refuse to see." The answer settled between them, carrying both promise and warning. Emily nodded slowly. Then she stepped fully into the room. The doors closed behind her with a soft, final sound. For the first time since the night began, she was alone, or as close to alone as she would ever be again. She moved toward the center of the chamber, her fingers brushing lightly over the mark on her wrist. It pulsed once, faint, alive. Emily Carter had walked into that building as a waitress, trying to survive another shift. She would not walk out the same, because now she carried something ancient, something powerful, something that had chosen her for reasons no one yet understood. And in 2 nights, the entire vampire court would decide what that meant. But one truth had already been written, undeniable and unchangeable. She was no longer ordinary, and the world of darkness would never ignore her again.